How you doing? Anthony Ferro here of Create SCI-FI. Remember that, sci-fi. Because this week, drum roll, we're gonna do some foam crafting, but what are we making? We're making a skillet. Now this is EVA foam. Doesn't weigh anything. Why a skillet on Create SCI-FI? Well, I got hired to do a sci-fi piece, right? So they want me to make some props and costumes because there's aliens and blasters and sci-fi gore. And so what I do is I go through and break it down. Okay, some binoculars, blaster, armor. And then there's a scene, because it's post-apocalypse, right? They're in a bunker or something, some little hovel, cooking some food, and then there's an interloper, and they're talking with this other character. They don't know if he's a good guy or bad guy. Turns out, maybe not so good. Then there's a fight, ba 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 bong. Guy takes a skillet, kapow, knocks out the other guy. So you gotta have a stunt skillet. So I'm excited to share this with you for a couple reasons. One, because it's just fun to do something different. But then on a practical level, right, this is a good project. If you've never worked in EVA foam, it's kind of like a first step, right? If we're doing like the 101, we're gonna make some discs, we're gonna glue it together. There's a wire frame in there. Then we're gonna mold it, shape it. Then we're gonna paint it with some plastic dip. So it's almost like a good practice project as well. Or, you know, if you wanna do a little knock 'em up, make a skillet so you can whack people in the head with it. Not for cooking. All right, so let's get right to it. And here we go. We're gonna make a foam skillet. All right, so we need some EVA foam. This is 8mm craft foam. Got my knife. You wanna make sure you have a very sharp blade. And right here I have this bowl. It's not quite 10 inches. I was going for like a 10-inch skillet, but this will be fine. And you just wanna make sure that you get a really evenly cut circle. Actually, you know, a circle's a hard thing to cut without a form. So there I have my disc, my piece of foam, and I'm gonna cut out a second one of those. So now I'm gonna take a wire hanger, and this is what I'm gonna use to make the armature, to make the support material. You could probably get some kind of craft wire, but I'm just using these hangers. I get these at the dollar store. And I'm just going to bend this. I have this frying pan that's a little smaller than the one that I'm making, and that way it just helps me to zero in on sizes. So now I have this wire frame roughed out, and I'm just testing the fit to the foam discs that I cut, and that looks good. And now I have an actual skillet here, and I'm using this to sort of judge the angle of the handle. So now I'm just taking the ends of the wire and I'm banging those in so that they don't poke through. Now I'm feeling like I just need a little extra support in my frame. So I just take one more piece of wire and I'm just going to put this across the center, and that's just gonna firm up my support. So now I lay this out and I mark it with a Sharpie. And what I'm gonna do here is I'm going to route out an area for the wire to set into so that it doesn't create a lump, so that it's flush when I glue it all together. And now with my Dremel tool, I just rough out an area here where the wire can sit flush with the foam. And I use a stone bit for this just because it doesn't tear up the foam too much. Now I test fit my armature wire, make sure that that's all fitting nice and snug and looking flush. And yeah, that looks good. And now I'm going to use contact cement. And what you do with this is you put it on one side and then the other, and you let it dry. Now here, the camera wasn't running when I cemented the two discs together, so I'm just going over it here for you. Basically, you cement both sides, you let it dry till it's tacky, and then you put them together, and they're not going anywhere once you put those together. So make sure that you aim carefully. It's really difficult to pull them apart once they are glued together. And now you have one piece of foam. All right, so moving on. So I have the two discs on there around my armature wire. And now I have my basic form. So now I'm just measuring the skillet to determine the lip of my skillet. So I cut this out of foam, and my strip is not quite long enough, so I'm gonna have to cut another smaller strip, but when we cement that together, that seam will be pretty invisible. So now I just test fit, and what I'm gonna do now is I'm going to take my Dremel tool, and I'm just gonna put a slight little bevel on this for when I shape it, I want the lip to go out a little bit. So again, with my stone bit, I just roughly form this, and now I put the same bevel on the lip. And you just wanna do this carefully. The stone bit still could easily tear up the foam. So now I take the contact cement again, and I put a bead on the lip and then put a bead on the base. Let that dry until it's tacky. And then once that's tacky, we can form it together. And it makes a really, really tight bond. So, you know, make sure you're aiming properly. So now I'm gonna have to add that little section that I talked about. Even though it's a little bit bigger, the foam is very workable. And then I'm just gonna trim the top off there so that it all matches. Now the bottom is a little ragged, but we're gonna fix that later with some quick seal. So now I'm just rounding off the corners, just testing it, making sure that everything's secure, and that feels really firm. So now I'm going to make a stencil of the handle. I looked online, all the handles kind of look the same, and so I'm using my pan there to make a template. And I'm gonna cut this out of poster board first so that I can trace it onto the foam. And I also did another handle piece on there, but I ended up not using that. So here I just trace out the handle. I'm gonna need 2 pieces so I can make a sandwich around the armature wire. And you just carefully trace that out. And so now I'm sharpening the knife. You always want a sharp blade, I keep saying that. And I'm just going to cut this out freehand. And now off camera, I glued that together, just made a sandwich around the armature wire. Now I'm going to test all the seams, just give everything a last once over before we get ready to mold this with heat. So now I get out my heat gun and you start heating up the foam. And this does 2 things. What it does is it smooths out all our cuts. And once it's heated up, we're just bending this out. We give it a more accurate skillet look. And the foam is pretty easy to work with. You just heat it and bend it. So now I'm just taking one more pass with the Dremel to smooth out any rough edges and to more uniform those 2 pieces that we put together on the handle. And again, I give it another look to make sure I don't want to do any more heat forming, and that looks pretty good. Okay, so in all the pictures, there's this little hole in the handle where I guess you wood hang it up. And I'm just taking my wood burning tool here, and I just burned a hole in the middle there, make sure you have ventilation. And then with the heat gun, that just cleans up any of the ragged edges. All right, so now I'm gonna get ready to seal up all those cracks and crevices. So I'm gonna use some quick seal here, some DAP quick seal. Basically, it's like using like a plastic Bondo. We're just gonna put some of this in all those creases and crevices, and I have those really deep holes in the bottom, and you just fill it up with this quick seal, and then we take some water on our fingers just to smooth it out. Now, Bill Duran over on Punish Props does a really detailed video on this, so actually in the description below, I'll link to his video on that. I mean, that's where I learned how to do this. So now I'm just gonna take some Mod Podge because I have these layers of foam and I have the quick seal, and I just wanna put one uniform layer on everything. And again, the Mod Podge, putting it on looks a little messy, but once it all dries and everything conforms, it's actually gonna be a nice seal. And there you see there, everything's sealed in. And now I'm going to hit it with the Plastidip. Plastidip is a truck bed liner, it's rubberized, and in this case, it actually just looks more like a frying pan. So now I have the coat of Plastidip on there, and that looks great as it is, but it's too shiny and we gotta add a little life to it. So now I'm just using some burnt sienna and some brown, and we're going to make this look a little rusted. Most all the reference images and even my own cast iron pan has just a little traces of rust on it. So what I'm doing here is applying some paint and just rubbing it off with a paper towel, and that's what gives it that muted hue that really reads as rust. And I'm just going through now to do another random pass. And the trick is here is not to overdo it and also not to be too methodical. You really want this to read as random and you want it to be subtle. So by wiping it off, that's what really blends it all together. So now, broken record, give it the once over. That looks good. And I want to do one pass of weathering on this, but before we do that, we're going to seal in the rust we just did with some clear coat. Now that's dried, and I'm just going to take some black acrylic and some water and just do a wash. And it's going to blend the rust and the Plastidip and all our layers. It's going to blend those all together. And once again, we wipe the majority of it off with a paper towel, but we're just looking for that light residue. So now I'm hitting this whole thing with a hairdryer, just so I can make sure that I'm happy with the way everything blended. And that looks good, and I'm gonna hit it with one final clear coat to seal that all in for good. And here's the final piece. Now, it really looks like a skillet. And the rust is subtle, but your eye picks it up. And this prop would never be presented like this. It would be in somebody's hand or being swung around, or in this case, it's gonna be in a fight. So this will work perfectly. One last look. Nice. Well, as I say a lot, principles are universal, right? So hopefully you see the value in making something like this, right? You can take these principles that we learned to build this and build anything. Build a helmet, build armor, build a skillet. Maybe you have a need for a stunt prop. And that came out really good. And the thing too, with these props, same thing with the armor and the blasters, you know, if you're in the room with me, if you saw this, like these things, the paint treatment you do, everything's a little heavy, but on camera, it just reads great with the light, with the movement. Same thing with this, like if you were sitting right here, if you were inspecting it, you know, it doesn't, there's something just a little, maybe it's not real. But on camera, I picked this up, oh, you want some eggs, it's moving around, bam, you whack the guy, looks great. All right, well, as always, I guess the only thing left to do now is to fire it up. All right, here we go.